Some viewers may find this content disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
Harry Green Jr. from the Bridgewater Triangle Paranormal Podcast. Yes, we are going to be up in my stomping grounds, the Northeast, figuring out what is going on with the Dogman. This is going to be an infamous one. Much better now that that has been taken care of, and I feel revamped, recharged, and ready to stalk the Dogman. It is now time for Harry Green and myself to take a walk into the darkness.
My creatures of the night, yes, welcome back to another episode of Midnight Lycanthropy here on Star Fox Radio. Our co-host tonight is actually from my neck of the woods in Massachusetts. I am up in Maine, but he's pretty close. We have Harry Green from the Bridgewater Triangle Paranormal Group. How you doing tonight, my man?
Good, very good. Thank you for having me on.
Excellent. No, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to sit down and hang out with us and really try to dive into some of this interesting Dogman topic. Would you like to give the audience a plug and just explain who you are and what you do?
Yep, they can find me on YouTube under the Bridgewater Triangle Paranormal Investigators. We're a paranormal team that goes out and we investigate such places in the triangle like the Hockomock Swamp and other hotspot locations. Now, in case you're wondering what is the Bridgewater Triangle, it's a 200-mile triangular region with all kinds of paranormal activity in it. And it stems from a Native American curse when the Pilgrims had the war with the natives. It was said that the natives cursed the land after they lost to King Philip's War. Some say it's a vortex, some say it's a curse. We're a unique group that was boots to the ground in 2020 to investigate all the hotspots and search for the truth.
That is absolutely beautiful stuff right there. And no, I appreciate you allowing me to be a part of your group, which is how I ended up linking in this conversation to what we're speaking about. So it's excellent. And I am more of a historian / journalist, and I'm a very visual creator and when it comes to art and such, but it's great to be able to speak to individuals such as yourself that get a ton of boots on the ground stuff, because I saw you, correct me if I'm wrong, in a kayak in Hockomock Swamp on your page, which was super cool. And yeah, I really like that. And like I said, I'm only maybe an hour or so away from you up in Maine, so at some point we should definitely try to get together in person and do some stuff. But also it'd be cool to collaborate, at least maybe once a month here or on your podcast whenever you get some time. And if you actually would like to, before we dive into some of the Dogman stuff, you had a Thunderbird experience, and you don't have to dive fully into that, but if you would like to touch on that experience or maybe anything else that you've had occur in the Hockomock Swamp, that'd be cool.
Sure. The story goes back to 1996. I was 14 years old. I grew up in Brockton, which, by the way, is right inside the Bridgewater Triangle towards the northern part. And me and a childhood friend of mine, Troy, we used to ride our bikes around, the old neighborhood. We used to go behind Brockton High School. So we used to ride our bikes behind Brockton High School. There used to be old quad trails behind there. They're all filled in now, but one particular day we were riding our bicycles through the quad trails, and we got off our bikes, and I'm not really sure why, and we were talking, and my friend, he looks up in the sky, and he goes, "Oh, shoot," except he didn't really say shoot, I'll keep it PG, but he runs off and hides in the tall grass, and I'm thinking, what is he running from? As I turned around, it sounded like a car driving on all four flat tires. The wind started to pick up. The trees were blowing like crazy. The brush was blowing like crazy. As I turned around, I saw this big, huge, massive bird in the sky coming from Belmont Street. And it was probably about 3 stories up. Each wingspan was probably larger than a 78 Lincoln Town Car. And he looked old. He had patches. Some fur was missing. It looked like brown, worn-out suede in the bald spots. And he was flying towards me. And he was very in sync. He didn't change altitude, nothing like that. And I noticed there was like cobwebs caught in his fur. His fur was knotted up. There's twigs caught in the fur. So you can tell that this bird was crashing through the trees. And the only thing I thought was, oh, I hope he doesn't mistake me for a worm and scoop me up and carry me on his way, because this bird was big enough to do that. But he flew over me. And as he flew over me, the fur that he had went flying everywhere. Picture like a cattail that you open up in the marsh, all that stuffing that goes everywhere. That's what it was like. And he flew by me going south towards the Hockomock Swamp. Now, this was before I ever heard of the Hockomock Swamp or the Bridgewater Triangle, which, by the way, the term Hockomock means place where spirits dwell. It was a native burial ground for the Wampanoags. So my friend Troy, he came out of hiding, and he's like, "Harry, did you see the size of that bird?" And I'm trying to be the calm, cool, collective one. I'm just like, "Yeah, I saw it. I knew it was going to harm us." But I was relieved it was gone. Now, we just thought that it was like a rare species of a bird that we never studied before in school. I did go home and I told my mother about this, but she just thought, because naturally, I was 14, I was a small child, that any bird in the sky that was big would look humongous. That would, she thought it automatically would stand out. But this bird was huge. Picture a raised ranch style house. It was wider than that. So we forgot about it actually throughout the years. I moved from the neighborhood. He did as well. In 2007, me and a couple buddies of mine, we snuck up to the old tuberculosis hospital in Hanson. It was abandoned. It was said to be haunted. I was a little bit of a skeptic at that time. So when we were up there, we were walking around, and you could hear children laughing and crying at the same time. So again, being the skeptical one, I was thinking, well, that's strange, but maybe there's, other people exploring inside. I'm not really sure. So I was like, you know what, let's just get out of here. And my friend was like, no. Something's telling me to walk around one more time. So we walked around one more time to the front entrance. All of a sudden, there was a white silhouette of a figure. It looked like he was on a walker, and he was floating towards the main entrance. So my friend, he was like, "It's an effing ghost." And we ran back to the car. But you know what? We were excited at the same time that we actually saw a ghost. We were debriefing about it. And for the longest time, that was the place to go on a Friday night when we were bored. So the next following year, I was telling my friend Portia, her name was Portia, I was telling her about this ghostly experience. And she goes, well, Harry, that's because you live in the Bridgewater Triangle. And I said, the what? And she said, well, you live in the Bridgewater Triangle. And I said, well, what is the Bridgewater Triangle? And she started laughing. She goes, Harry, you lived out here all your life, and I lived in the state for how many years now? And I've heard of this place, and you never have. And I said, no, what are you talking about? And she started to explain that it was a triangular region with a Native American curse where people have seen UFOs, Bigfoots. And I started laughing. I'm like, oh, okay, Portia, sure, whatever. And she goes, no, Harry, I'm serious. People have seen thunderbirds, large birds in the sky right here in Brockton. The second she said that, I'm like, wait a minute, what did you just say? Did you just say a thunderbird, a large bird? Now I'm starting to remember the things from my childhood. And I said, oh my God, I remember seeing this bird when I was younger. And she was like, see, Harry, I told you. So she started to research this region on her computer. I did as well when I went home. And I always had an interest in this region ever since then. So, like I said, in 2020, we were boots to the ground now, really exploring all the hotspots to find out the truth.
Jeez, crow, that is very, very interesting and super intriguing stuff, but also straight up nightmare fuel along the lines of all that. And I appreciate you sharing. I've definitely heard a ton about the Bridgewater Triangle and also Hockomock Swamp, but like I said, I pretty much just focus on the Dogman and such.
Yeah.
So I knew a little bit of the history and some of the darker sides, as you were stating, yet I didn't know the full, I guess, nightmares that were occurring until recently, and also some of the stuff you had just informed me with. And I have been researching the Dogman for quite a long time now, and I was wondering, have you heard of any people, or not even necessary people directly, but any sort of encounters down there?
Yes, there was one in 1976. Now, it was said that the Michigan Dogman, I guess he's seen every 10 years, with years ending in the number 7, which, a lot of these reports are very close to, those years. I know there was one in 1936 in Wisconsin, and there was one in 1937 in Michigan, actually by Robert Fortney. You saw 5 dogs. He was attacked by all 5. He said one of them stood up on 2 legs. But again, out here in 1976, that's pretty close to a year ending in 7. But out here in the town of Abington, and it was April 30th, 1976, a 12-year-old girl named Carol Kane, she came out here, and she was living on a farmland. She went out to feed her 2 ponies. They were named Jojo and Peekaboo. And when she went out, she saw a big, giant black dog the size of a pony, and it was feeding on them. So she ran back into the house to her father, Philip Kane. He came out with a gun, and he said the dog took off into the adjacent swamps. Now, the town of Abington went under a lockdown, actually, for 2 days because of that. They were in search for this dog. Officer Frank Curran, I think that's his last name, don't quote me on that, he got a tip to where the dog's whereabouts was, on the Summer Street Railroad tracks, and he went down there. He shot at the dog, but he said the bullet seemed to miss this dog, and the dog just walked off down the train tracks, and it was never seen ever again. But it was known as the Black Dog of Abington. He wasn't, a humanoid dog. He was just a big cryptid black dog the size of a pony. He wasn't, he didn't have like a body of a human and a head of a dog.
Super interesting, and I've never heard that before, so I do appreciate you sharing that with me, because I tried to verify, and I know you verified that, so now that means I can document everything that I do have on file regarding the Dogman. And yeah, I think what potentially you were just describing and what that individual saw falls more into the line of the spectral and paranormal side of what we investigate, because we also believe it and a lot of the encounters are physical, meaning that they've been hit and disposed of and shot at and left body fluids and spots around the house, or slobber, etc. Yet then other times, like you just stated, people are firing at it where they're pretty optimistic they hit it directly and it was causing no sort of damage, which would then solidify it was more paranormal based. And I've only heard, outside of what you just said, one encounter myself of an individual I used to know that lived down in the area, and him and his sisters and brothers and were out there just exploring Hockomock Swamp, and they said that they used to love that area and really had never had any sort of paranormal activity. I mean, they were younger teenagers at the time, but when they were out there, they were camping and just exploring and would go out, like I said, all the time. But one time they were out there, they started to hear strange howls and didn't really sound normal to them. And they saw what to be bipedal, shadowy, canine looking creatures in the forest line near the swamp. And They said after that, yeah, they never really went back. And I had heard of, like I said, that encounter and also more of the paranormal stuff, but I also had heard of Bigfoot down there too. So that's why it's cool to get you on the podcast here and actually have you dive into that. Have you heard of anything outside of, or even more stuff inside of the Bridgewater Triangle or Hockomock Swamp involving the Dogman potentially? Or
that was the only sighting that's popular around here. A lot of stuff doesn't go documented. That doesn't end up being documented. I know, like a lot of the Bigfoot sightings, it's hard to research into one of them to find out where and who the police officer was, because a lot of that's hush hush, and like even the historical societies, they don't really keep information on it. And I'm not really sure why. But that's the only sighting out here, and I know there are usually always sightings near swamps. I've noticed that. It's always, all these cryptids are always in swamps. Now, let me ask you, out of your research, was any of the sightings ever near power lines?
yeah, you were definitely correct about the swamps and such. And I have a hypothesis and theory that the ones that are living, such as you and I, that are seen drinking water and, like I said, banging on houses and leaving slobber, etc., they are in an area where they are easily accessible for food sources, meaning in a reservoir, you have game, you have water, and there's really not necessarily too much human activity. And if there is, you can most likely avoid it if you really want to. And that's why I think a lot of the ones that, if it was a physical animal, is going to be found in those areas. And now that you stated about power lines and such,
Yeah.
I would have to potentially, I guess, look into more of maybe the locations. I mean, some people, there are power lines around in like some of the general public houses where people have had encounters, but I don't, off the top of my mind, remember really anyone solidifying directly that or mentioning something with the power line. Why do you mention that? Would you like to explain?
Yes. The majority of the sightings out here happen near the high teas. I'm sure you heard of Bill Russo, his famous Pukwudgie experience. That was near the high teas. The high teas run right through the Hockomock Swamp. And we know that the high teas give off electromagnetic forces, EMFs. So the theory is that these high tension wires, they're producing these EMFs, they're creating some kind of vortex releasing all these anomalies. Because it said that, entities, ghosts, spirits, they channel off of EMFs. Which actually I did build what was called an EM pump a couple of years ago, an electromagnetic pump. It has 2 DC motors in it, 2 quartz crystals with 2 earth magnets. Because my theory is this: if a place is left untouched, let's say, a person passes away in a home and the home was left untouched, meaning the walls were never repainted, the floors were never polyurethane, it was never dusted, the furniture was never moved around. I believe that their energy is strong in that place. So the EM pump, I believe, can maybe produce something. Maybe if it's in an intelligent sense or a residual sense, I'm not really sure. But the study is there. So I believe that these transmission lines are actually producing these anomalies. Because, like I said, the majority of the hotspots out here, where all these sightings are near these high T lines.
Wow, that's really interesting, and that would make sense, definitely. Like you were stating, if something was to potentially be coming through with like a portal, or as you were saying, manifesting for sure. So that is something I will have to dive into and look into a little bit more and share with some of the researchers within the North American Dogman Project that really dive more into the aspects of that. I try to make sure that when I always do direct individuals to proper people, that they specialize in certain aspects, because myself, I feel definitely really comfortable speaking to individuals about, existing and prehistoric and potentially physical dogmen. But when it comes to paranormal and like extraterrestrial, etc., I don't feel as comfortable. So I tend to definitely make sure that if people, I'll document it, but if people really want to know more and I don't feel I have confident answers, I make sure to send them in the direction of the people that I know will take care of them correctly.
Yeah.
When it comes to Dogman in general, what do you feel about it? What's your interest or lack of interest, or how do you stand on the whole topic?
I think a lot of it stems from the classic werewolf. Um, I don't know of any reports of it looking, human with like a dog head, anything like that. I think it's more of just a cryptic dog. I think it's a huge dog. I do know it was one of the deities of Egypt, Anubis. He was the body of a man, the head of a dog, who guided souls into the afterlife. It seems to maybe stem from him. But again, all these sightings aren't really documented that it looks, half man, half dog. So again, I think it's just a cryptid dog.
Very interesting. And yeah, you're right. There's definitely so much that dives into it. And you have the ancient stuff like the cynocephali, and then you have the more physical potential aspects mixed in with spiritual and paranormal, with the Wendigo and the Skinwalker, that is the one that takes the pelt of an animal. And then you have the ones where people talk more about like the Rougarou and the curse, meaning like the werewolf, such as Isabella Clarke, the werewolf girl, who was supposedly consumed by some sort of curse when she went over to Europe and then came back. And then when she was back home in Georgia, mysterious livestock mutilations, pet mutilations, and she would be out at random times at the night. And then people would claim to see this massive shadowy black, because it was night out, but something with glowing eyes. And yeah, they shot at it, and her parent, or her mom, I should say, did verify that she treated her for wounds that were caused by a gun. But then you have more of the actual dogman aspects, which is what we believe doesn't go back and forth. It stays in that type of form. But people do tend to obviously misidentify things a ton. But in reality, too, the description or term dogman doesn't have to qualify as canine, because a hyena, which we believe is involved in this whole thing, is not a canine. And same thing with baboons, because we get reports of baboon looking dogmen, and again, they're not canine. And people sometimes, I think, that's just what they saw, so that was the first thing that came to their mind when they described it. And actuality, there's really only kind of a few cases of them maybe having a human body and the head of a wolf. That would also potentially go back more in history too. I believe the cynocephali, they're described in a couple different ways, that they were humanish with the arms and such, but then had canine-like legs and canine heads. But then other depictions show that they had humanish heads and arms, kind of like King Lycan. So yeah, it's really interesting, that's for sure.
Yeah, there's not a lot of reports out here of them. Just like I said, that one in 1976. Now, I did ask around. There was no one really documented anything. And like even with my Thunderbird, it was 1996. That was less documented sighting. It seems that, in my theory is this, that we're building homes now in the Hockomock swamp. So it all that positive energy is sandwiching over, the negative energy that got imbued into the land from King Philip's War.
That could definitely make a ton of sense too, like you said right there. And that's really definitely an interesting and really positive way to look at it for sure, which is super cool. But when it comes to outside of Massachusetts, the Northeast is definitely, we have a ton of reports up here of these type of animals, beings, which is really interesting. And Northeast is one of the older aspects of the country for sure, meaning when it comes to being colonized and settled, which is why there's all the paranormal folklore that goes around the New England area in general. Yet when it comes to any sort of encounters just in Dogman territory, it doesn't have to be in the Northeast or anywhere. Have you had any that you felt really terrified you, or have you had a chance ever really to listen to around and hear about any of the infamous ones that have occurred?
My favorite ones were the Michigan Dogman and the one in Wisconsin on Bray Road. Woman was driving on Bray Road and she saw this big cryptid dog feeding on rope.
Yeah, would you like to talk about those? Maybe explain those to the audience for a few before we let you get back to what you're doing.
Yeah, it was Elkhorn, Wisconsin, and it was in the early 90s. I guess the first sighting down there was in 1936. Again, close to a year that ends in, the number 7. But it really became popular in the 80s, 90s. A woman named Laurie, and I'm probably chopping the last name, and Racine, something like that, was driving, and she was driving down Bray Road, which is all farm and swamp, and she saw this dog, this big cryptid dog eating rope. Now, the reason why I mentioned power lines is because I didn't see any like high, these transmission lines, these high T's on that road when I looked on, like Google Maps or anything like that.
Yeah, no, that's a infamous case right there. Linda Godfrey, rest in peace. She was the first person really to start churning out information about that. And she was actually one of the first people to speak to all those individuals that this was occurring to. Before that other gentleman that was, he had some sort of official position. I can't remember what it was, animal and game regulation or something along the lines of that. But yeah, no, that's a really interesting area for sure, because that's pretty much in the spot I like to call Werewolf Square. Meaning,
Yeah.
You got Ohio, you got Tennessee, you got Kentucky, you got parts of Pennsylvania, you got Michigan, you got Wisconsin. It's all right in there, and those are some of the oldest modern day reports, meaning
Right.
A lot of people for some reason don't like to verify the Native American reports about this, but the thing is, the Native Americans have been speaking about these type of creatures long before, quote unquote, the Michigan Dogman was ever a thing. So a lot of times people get the misconception that it's a more of a modern day thing, but it's really not. It's just the Dogman terminology is more modern.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, the Michigan Dogman goes all the way back to the 1800s. And the first encounter out there was in 1937. And again, it's very close to the 1936 in Wisconsin. Wisconsin and Michigan are neighboring states. I do know, though, that there's been more Dogman sightings than Bigfoots, believe it or not.
I love that you just said that, because I try to explain that to individuals all the time when they're suggesting that there's no sightings or no sort of evidence to support Dogman. And yeah, to be very fully honest with everybody, there's just as much Dogman stuff as there is for UFOs, and way more about it than there is for, say, the Loch Ness Monster or Mothman or anything like that. So it is really interesting why people kind of term the interesting eye when something like that is potentially posted, because I've had that happen to me in some groups that are supposed to be about cryptids and paranormal based stuff. I would post something about the Dogman and then they would just troll. I wouldn't respond, but I would always find it amusing because cryptozoology is part of discovering unknown species, yet also it's documenting things that are verifiable, and there's a ton of stuff. So no, it's really cool that you definitely understand that and have an open mind towards the topic, because I've never had any paranormal aspects or experiences, so I can't say yes or no if the Dogman really exists. All I know is people are seeing things and people have been seeing things. So I just try to approach it with a healthy topic of skepticism, but also be subjective and objective healthily, you know?
Yeah, and you know, a lot of people look at it as paranormal, and it might not be anything paranormal. Like going back to my Thunderbird experience, it might not have been a Thunderbird. It actually resembled the condor from the movie Godzilla, the original 1930s one. So if you think about it, the directors and producers of that movie had an idea, a visual of what type of bird they wanted in that movie. So it's almost as if that bird was very common out in Japan, maybe at that time. So it could have been a rare species of a condor that maybe came over here to the States and just, you know, went extinct due to its massive size, you know, somewhere through time. So it could be the same thing with this Dogman. It could just be a cryptid wolf or like what you were saying, a hyena or something like that.
Beautifully stated, my friend, because that's really, like I said, what I specialize in is just the aspects of, hey, none of these animals that a lot of people think went extinct 10,000, 11,000 years ago really didn't, and that they have and are in these areas still. So, no, it's super interesting because we have a science team and I'm trying to get more people on the science team. But when it comes to just sitting down and trying to speak to people, I just bring up the topics of, like I said, existing and prehistoric animals, missing people, the cave systems, some of the strange footprints we have. And that's what I talk about. I don't, try to force this topic on anybody, and I'm not trying to make anybody believe in the Dogman and such. I myself, I don't know. All I know is people are missing, like I said, in areas with cave systems, national forests, national parks. So what's occurring? Obviously something's occurring, and it would
Right.
just be really coincidental if all these people are reporting seeing things like that. Sure, some are misidentification. Unfortunately, some are crazy. Unfortunately, some are hoaxing. Yet once you filter all
Yes.
that, there's still a large amount of quality stuff,
Yeah, I believe that there was something out there at one time. I do believe, you know, that when people hear about it, they think maybe they've seen something, and come rest assured it was probably nothing. I know, like, I'll give my Thunderbird as an example. Um, a lot of these Thunderbird reports, they've been the size of turkey vultures. So who's to say that, you know, it wasn't a turkey vulture that they seen, but they want to believe, you know, it's some kind of, you know, Thunderbird or pterodactyl. Because I do know a couple of years ago we were driving through Easton and I stopped the car because I saw something in the road, and there was this. The bird was pretty big, and it extended its wings, and it flew up going into Wheaton's farm. And my friend Paul, he's like, "Quick, Harry, grab your camera. You know, there's your Thunderbird. Take a picture of it." And I'm just like, "Paul, no, that's not it. The one I saw was bigger." So, you know, these things that people are seeing might not be these, you know, ancient cryptids.
Again, amazing, because that's what I really try to specify and explain to people, just about sometimes the human mind plays tricks on us in regards of,
Yes.
we're smart as individuals and we think that we can figure out everything, so our mind's trying to process it. Meaning, I'll give you a quick example before we let you get back to what you need to be doing. Say something occurs to you and I, and we are out in the swamp or whatever. As we're trying to flee the situation, or maybe not even fleeing yet, we're trying to process what's happening. So we might not even be seeing something, and now we're trying to figure out, oh, what's making this noise, and then we see a shadow, and then our emotions and our natural born terror of werewolves and horror movies and all this stuff starts coming into play. Whereas, say, if you have a fox with you or your dog or anything along the lines of that, they're smart too, right? Well, they might actually, if you were able to understand their way of communication, their recollection of the event that unfolded would actually be a lot more credible than the humans version, because they're not trying to understand all that. Okay.
Right.
They're not thinking about horror movies. They just know something large out there is coming towards them. They hear it, they pick up on it, and then they leave the situation. Their mind's not trying to picture all this other stuff as they're fleeing. They just know they need to remove themselves from the situation. Yet as we are fleeing, it really could just be a branch that slammed down or something, but our minds are just telling us it's a massive beast coming towards us, which it really could be, or it could be absolutely nothing. So
yeah, the brain fills in the gaps. We had a situation like that. We were investigating Camp Kwani, and a quick rundown. It's the story of a girl named Alice. She was supposed to be wed on her wedding day. They found her in the cabin, and they say that Alice now haunts this camp. Her rocking chair, rocks back and forth at the top of the cabin. Well, come to find out, doing some research and an investigation, we dove into Ancestry.com, and we found out that this family, Albert, never had any niece named Alice. But again, it was a campfire story, but it was told to so many people that even the groundskeepers now believe the story to be true. He was telling me that he heard, a woman in high heels walking above him one day when he was closing up the cabin. Well, come to find out, above the cabin, there was a prop room, and there was a door in the hallway that doesn't shut tight, and there was a ball inside. So who's to say, an object, or like the ball didn't roll out of the closet, it was bouncing across the floor. Maybe that's what he heard, but the mind filled in the gaps. So he automatically believed, oh, it must be, the spirit of Alice, because that's what he was told so many times.
So true, man. So true. And again, kudos and beautifully spoken, my friend. Well, thank you so much for popping on by tonight and hanging out with everybody on Midnight Lycanthropy, including myself, and just really diving into your experience, but also your thoughts on just cryptids in general and the Dogman topic. So I really appreciate it, and I do look forward to collaborating again at some point. Like I said, I had to rebrand myself, but I'm trying to get back all my old content up right now, and all my new stuff will be coming out. So yeah.
I noticed, because I try to look onto your YouTube page, and the videos were down, and some of them were set to private.
Thank you for everyone who once again stopped by tonight for another episode of Midnight Lycanthropy here on StarFox Radio. If you did enjoy this episode, please like, subscribe, and share it. Feed the algorithm, and I will see you on the next one.